Hello, it is such a pleasure to be chatting with Dr. Richard Deleveaux, an alum of Suffolk, CAS board member, but I won't give it all away because I want you to tell us all the hats you wear at Suffolk and all the amazing things. But I am so excited to be chatting with you as we celebrate Black History Month and to hear from you about your history and how this month plays into all that you do. So without further ado, I will start with my first question about tell us about you, your background, and how you identify.
Ooh,
It's a lot.
tell you about me. Well, my name is Rachel Deleveaux, some call me Dr. Rachel Deleveaux. I am a Suffolk alum. I graduated in 2000, and it was an interesting time. Like going back to school, I had finished my undergrad, and I think I had shared it was a very interesting time in my life where I was looking for a sense of meaning. And it's interesting how we identify like what is meaningful at different stages, right? And at that age, I had just turned 25. I think for me, I had associated success and meaning with accolades and titles, right? And so I literally pursued my master's because, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I had thought about, man, what will people say about me at the end of my life should I not make it? And I just felt like what would have been said would have been very short. I didn't feel at the time like I had done anything significant. I didn't feel like I had made an impact anywhere. Now, certainly at 44, um, I don't understand it that way anymore, right? It's not about success, it's about significance, like purpose and meaning and all those things. But at 25, you know uh, I found myself in a space where I felt like to mean something I had to go back and get some more education. And so I found myself right fresh off of chemo at Suffolk, getting my master's in higher education administration. I was clear that I did not want to be a teacher. But um, what was important to me was systemic change, and to be able to be in spaces where I could do that. And so I got my master's from Suffolk in higher education administration. Worked in higher ed for a long time, doing a lot of like student facing work in residence life, student affairs, and ultimately got burnt out. Um, so, kind of around 2012, did a pivot and pivoted to like nonprofit work, where I was still working, even though like at the time I was working for the city, I was still working with higher ed institutions, kind of creating the pipeline from high school to college. So I called myself a gap filler. I did that work for a while, and then um, ended up doing some operational work, still on the nonprofit side. And then as when it's about your purpose, you get pulled where you're supposed to be. So I got pulled back to higher ed, where now I do diversity strategy and engagement for Simmons University. But my experience in that time, um, when I was getting my master's, was so meaningful that when I was looking for an opportunity to get involved, Suffolk, I couldn't think of another place, a better place to be involved. So I am in my sixth year, sitting on the CAS board, currently as the president. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that, when I got on the board, it was primarily older white men, you know, um, and now the board is reflective of the students, right? So you have men, you have women, you have diversity in race, diversity in thought, and so that's very refreshing to know that, this is my last year, I'm on my way out, but to leave a legacy of something better than I found. It's been amazing.
Always better to leave it better than you found it.
Always.
I appreciate that. As we discuss identity and background. Can you share how your cultural identity played a pivotal role in your career journey?
Yeah. So when we think about my culture identity, um, I obviously identify as a Black woman, right? I think what was most profound for me growing up is my socioeconomic background, right? And so I grew up poor, right? And I think how that's informed my career trajectory and just even like things that I am naturally attracted to is I'm always thinking about whose voice is not in the room. And oftentimes, the people that are not in the room are socioeconomically disadvantaged and typically belong to a historically underrepresented group, be it women or Black people. And so I always have that lens when I'm in any space, particularly work where we're making a lot of decisions, where we're doing a lot of strategic planning, and so it's just important to think about, well, whose voice is inherently not in the room. It's oftentimes underrepresented, and it's oftentimes socioeconomically disadvantaged. And so I think for me, because my positionality is that, I am always thinking about that in every space that I'm in.
I appreciate that. As we celebrate Black History Month, what does Black History Month mean to you, and does it hold any significance?
It's American history, first of all.
Yes, it is.
It's American history. What makes Black history is how we've had to navigate American history. So it's not, the fact that we have, Black Americans in America that makes Black history. That's not true. Like, no matter what who's telling the history, there are certain things that are a matter of a fact. It's not a matter of opinion, and it's not relegated to a race, right? But what makes Black history so remarkable for me is looking at some of the challenges that we've had to overcome as a Black race over the years. That, to me, that is Black history. The resiliency we've had to build, to the mental and emotional toughness we've had to overcome, right? And continue to persevere with, just because of so many different systemic challenges that we deal with daily, right? And the thing that's interesting, is it's not something that we talk about in context of it being in the past. Black history is present, right?
Mm.
So we don't come together to commemorate. We come together to celebrate it because it is ongoing, right? And so for me, I think that that's what's most profound. It's really holding the fact that Black history is American history. And within that, what is unique to us is how we've had to navigate the challenges that have come from the history of being an American in this country.
Okay. How has your cultural identity empowered you in your line of work? I know that you said, being someone who came from a lower socioeconomic class has changed how you practice, what you practice, right? But
Mhm.
what about your racial and cultural identity? What role has that played? And especially in empowering you?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that even though I did grow up socioeconomically disadvantaged, I was rich in culture, rich in love, rich in who I was, am, and where I came from, right? And I feel like that has definitely given me agency and ownership to excel regardless of where I came from. My upbringing, definitely instilled in me at a young age, it's not where you start, it's how you finish,
Yeah.
right? And so really being able to own every space that I was in, no matter how much money I had in my pocket, that actually had no implications on who I was as a person or what I could bring to the table, right? And so, even though, that's how, those were the conditions under which I grew up, it didn't have any bearing on what my opportunities would be, either because they were given to me or it was something that I created for myself, right? And so, um, in terms of my cultural identity, I attribute a lot of that to my family in terms of cultivating a mindset to seek out limitless possibilities, right? And never succumbing to any challenges, whether perceived or real, because of being black, right? Or being Caribbean American. So I would say that that has served me well. So, I own every space that I'm in. I speak with confidence, and I don't feel I don't have any level of inferiority just because I grew up poor.
Okay. And in the space that you are in, I know for a fact that the higher that you go, the less diversity there is in leadership.
Mhm.
What are some changes that you'd love to see in the workplace, in the industry, that can help bring about greater representation, especially for Black people?
So, what you're saying is spot on. It's true, right? When we think about, I think for me it's an algebraic equation, like this plus this should equal this, right? And oftentimes what's missing when we think about our community is some pieces from that algebraic equation, right? So when we think about like what allows us to get to those spaces, I think sometimes what's missing from that equation is like mentorships and an actual sponsor, right? And when we think about it in terms of Black women, it's something like 7 in 10 Black women have not had a mentor or any type of sponsor, right? And so, how do we begin to normalize those things so that opportunities and resources are shared, right? I think one of the most rewarding things that's happened in my life is that I've been able to be a success story. I think one of the most challenging things in my life is I've been able to be a success story, right? And so, you know, thinking about all of the things that I've had to kind of figure out because I didn't have, you know, a mentor or an ally or a support, or there wasn't someone giving me the playbook on how to navigate these spaces. When I look at some of my counterparts that do have access to that, right? And so if I were thinking about what I would want to see changed. I would want to see access to those opportunities where there's some strategic mentorship happening, where there's some strategic allyship happening, where there's some strategic sponsorships that happen to create more opportunities.
I love that. And we're gonna come back on to the issue of sponsorship and mentorship because that is very relevant in every walk of life.
Mhm.
But I wanted to also ask, what has been the biggest success story that you have had in your career today?
I mean, the biggest success story is having a son, having my child, right? Like, more than any other title that I have in this world, mom supersedes it all.
Oh,
You know? And to have an amazing child that I get to impart a legacy to, right? That begins his life in a better condition than I started mine's in, gives me hope that his life when he's my age will look so much better than mine's does, right? That is my biggest accomplishment. you know um but I think, kind of thinking about that, outside of that, you know I think for me success again is relative. Like, sure, I could tell you about some amazing cool programs and initiatives and things like that, but I think when we think about like what success means, I've had to kind of retool that. So what does success mean for Rachel? Like, and what that means for me now is, how have I grown as a person? That is
Mm.
my success. Like, if we were having this conversation 10 years ago and I was saying the same things now that I was saying in 10 years, for me, that's not a success. Success for me is growth in mindset. How am I understanding things outside of myself? How am I understanding me now, and what I need, and what I'm able to give? And so that's my success, Ade. Like, coming from, someone who didn't take education or life very seriously. Right,
Doctor.
all right, I was I was looking at my undergrad transcript, and I do this every now and then just to kind of remind myself, right? Because I think sometimes when we forget where we came from, sometimes who we are, we can get real caught up in that. So I pulled out my undergrad transcript, and on that transcript was someone who did not take their education very seriously. It was someone that did not have a plan for herself. That was that person. Like, I think I graduated overall with a 2.9, right? And a 3.2 in my major. And then to become a doctor and have a 4.0 GPA all the way through, right? Just a completely different person. That's my major success, because to the degree that anyone grows is to the degree that they'll be able to be most impactful. If Rachel stayed at that 2.9, I wouldn't be able to be as impactful as the Rachel that did the 4.0, right? More self-aware, just much more like thinking, global thinking around how me being a better me can help more people. So for me, that is the success story. The opportunity to continue to like wake up every morning and think about how I can be most impactful, how can I serve? That's the success.
I love it. We started talking about mentorship a little bit, and sponsorship. I want to ask two questions. Who or what has been most helpful in your professional success? And can you tell me how mentorship has played a success, has played and has had an impact towards success?
Oh, two tough questions. So, who has been most impactful um, professionally? That's really hard to answer. And I think that, and I'll be able to explain that more in my second part, but I would say in terms of just work ethic, my grandmother has been most impactful. My grandmother came to this country with no more than a third grade education, and was one of the wisest people that I knew. And also, just the way she approached everything, it was wholeheartedly, hands down, like she paid attention to every particular detail, made no excuses about anything, and so I learned that at a very early age to accept responsibility for things, whether, and really do my best, and recognizing that our best looks different every day, but still do my best, right? That foundation came from my grandmother. To your second question, in terms of like mentors, I was really thinking about this. Um, and I try not to get choked up, but I actually never had a mentor, right? And so, imagine growing up and not really knowing what you're capable of, catching glimpses of it in different spaces. But it really wasn't until I pursued my doctorate that I realized what I was capable of, right? And so professionally, I still don't know what I'm capable of. Like, I know that I'm I know that I'm not mediocre. I know, right? Like, I know a lot, but there's still some, like, I liken it to that movie Shazam, where, it's the story about the kid that gets these superpowers and is trying to figure out the depths of his superpowers. Like, can I fly? Can I teleport? Am I invisible? Can I, and then he realizes some parts of his power, but it's just touching the tip of the iceberg of what he's really capable of, right? And so I feel like that's exactly where I'm at, where I realize some of my superpowers, but not nearly to the degree that is impactful. all because I didn't have a mentor. Now, some people look at that and see that as a sob story. I see it as an opportunity, right? To create the opportunities to be mentored, right? It requires a level of vulnerability, which is why growth mindset is important, but you can't get what you don't articulate that you need, right? And so for me, I'm definitely in this space of being vulnerable to say, hey, how I understand and define mentor is someone that is putting your names in spaces that you're not in, right? Someone that is with you every step of the way as you're achieving these goals and giving you feedback in the playbook. I've never had that, right? But it doesn't mean that I can't get that. It doesn't mean that there haven't been any tools or skills or impartations that I haven't that I received over the years that haven't been helpful, because that's not the case. I've received a lot of advice. I've received a lot of support, right? And I've been able to put those things together to work for my good to get me where I am. And it's just now the self-awareness that what got me to where I am is not going to be enough to get me to where I'm going. And so identifying that so that I can get to the next step.
And speaking of that, where you going? You are a leader on campus. A lot of people are able to look up to you, whether in your current role or here at Suffolk, and we're grateful for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you interact with students, and I know you're a mentor now because you are doing the thing that you didn't have. And so you are showing us that example of like, hey, um, I may not have had it, but I'm going to be able to give it. What
Mm-hmm.
tips do you have for students who were in positions like you were? I think, sometimes we talk about networking, and for whatever reason, sometimes networking is scary for people. Sometimes people don't like the idea of like, hey, I am building a relationship to get something.
Mm-hmm.
But what mindset do you approach it with, and what tips would you give students who you currently mentor?
Yeah. So what I would tell students, they have absolutely nothing to lose. Like, people want to help students, right? I think sometimes less willing to help adults, definitely willing to help students, right? There's some type of moral obligation there that people generally feel to helping students. And so, listen, this is the time to get your needs met, right? You have nothing to lose by going for it and asking for it. Like, this is the time to be most fearless, because you know when you're a college student, the presumption is that you should be in a space of like learning and wanting to absorb information, and people are ready to do that. And so that's the piece of advice that I give them. Like, look, you have nothing to lose, go for it. The worst thing that could happen is someone tells you no, but go for it anyway. Because you ask enough people, somebody's going to say yes, but you have to just be fearless about it. You can't stop at the one that may say no. You have to keep going until you find the yes. I would tell an adult similar similar things. I think sometimes as an adult, though, that fear has increased because we've experienced some level of rejection at this stage that kind of paralyzes us in some ways. But at the end of the day, there's always somebody who's willing. There is somebody who's willing, and so definitely would tell someone that. The second question you asked me, could you just repeat it?
Sure. It's about those tips really. And the scary part, I think you sort of like addressed that, but the tips you would give the student, and I think you sort of added that. But maybe I'll add something to that in terms of what's the secret to building and sustaining meaningful relationships.
Yeah, always meeting people, right? So like, you know, I we can't see it as a chore, right? And it can't be disingenuous, but going out in whatever spaces you're in, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a networking event, and I don't want to say networking like, because sometimes you have these different groups of people that put them on, but I feel like any event is a networking event, right? Because it's an opportunity to get someone to know someone that you've never known before. I think where we get it wrong sometime though is when we're meeting people, especially when they have divulged that they're in some type of position of power, we go in for the ask right away. And I think that that is wrong. I think that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So like really cultivating authentic relationships, not like you about to be their BFFs, but I actually care about who you are and how you got where you got, before I start asking you, hey, what can you do for me? Right. So coming in with this posture of, service, how can I be of service to you? Or how can I be of service to your cause? Right. People are more willing to then share whatever they have when you're in service to them. Right. And so I think that that's super important, but just get good at meeting people. You never know why. And sometimes you'll meet someone and you might meet someone and it may not align with what you need or what you're looking for, but you never know why you met the person. It could be because someone else might be in need of something. It could be that later on down the road you might, but you've cultivated this great dynamic in which you can reach back and be like, "Hey, do you happen to know XYZ?" So just being in the position where you're constantly meeting people, you just never know where that will take you, you know. Um and then like I know we're in this ever moving, ever changing society right now, but some things that are still true is people buy you before they buy your lifestyle. I find that has never changed, right? And so I say that because, I'm always asking the question to myself, am I buyable? Right? Is someone going to buy into me before they hear about anything that I'm doing or anything that I have going on? Do they like Rachel? Is Rachel someone that they would want to hang out with and get to know? And so become the person that you would want people to engage with, right? And become the person that you would want to engage with too.
Absolutely. I always tell students that the best time to build your network is probably while you're in college, because when you're in college, like people are more receptive, which is the thing that you just hit right on the head.
Yeah.
And also you have time, right? You have
Mhm.
time to build that relationship, nurture it, so that
Mhm.
when you become a graduate and you say, hey, Dr. Deleveaux, it's not like, who? It's like, oh, I know this person. And because we've had conversations and we know each other now, I can speak to who
Mhm.
that person is, as opposed to like you just meet them the first time and you're like, oh yeah, because I introduced myself, so now we're good. I'm like, no, it's the same thing like a friendship. The day that you meet someone is not the day that you become BFFs. You nurture that before you can
Yeah,
say this person is
exactly.
my friend. So I try to explain it that way, because sometimes people think that, oh my gosh, like I am just going to just do this and that's it. And networking is like every space we're in. I tell people like when you enter the bus, it's an opportunity to network. When you get into class, it's an opportunity to network, because you never know who you're gonna say hello to.
Yeah, and it's not. I think sometimes we overcomplicate it too. I know I can be an overthinker, so that part I can relate with. But people are, very simple. Like you can start a conversation just by complimenting someone on something. Hey, I love them shoes. Oh my goodness, that lipstick looks great on you. Oh, what cologne is that? Just organic conversation will go so far. You know. And yield some great results.
My next question for you involves what you do as a board member, a leader, a DEI practitioner. How do you build inclusive spaces?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so what do I do? So there's the board stuff. So I'm the president right now of the CAS board. I also sit on some other committees on like DEI advisory boards. And then my full-time job, I'm an assistant vice president for diversity strategy and engagement. And then I have my own consulting company that looks at organizational culture development and strategic advising, right? My role in those spaces, albeit position might be different, but I'm always thinking about the work through strategy and engagement, right? So, I always think, how do we build systems that are sustainable, right? Because I don't think that it should be like one person dependent. And so, like, even when we're thinking about, like, for instance, the CAS board and some initiatives that we're trying to push, we're pushing them through committees because that's a group of people, right? And then we're building the framework within the committees to think about cadence and timeline and strategic partnerships, so that whatever we're building can be an ongoing thing regardless of who's sitting in the seats. Right? When I'm thinking about that in context of my full-time job, I'm also thinking the same way. So how are we ascertaining what the needs are? Well, we often get that through data. And then what are the ways in which we address those needs, right? Whether it's through systems, policies, or programs, who are the stakeholders and how do we approach it that way? And then how do we create sustainability through dosage and timelines, so that no matter who's sitting in those partnership seats, the work still continues, right? Same thing with my consulting firm. I'm always thinking about that in terms of strategy. Well, what are the issues? I'm always asking a lot of questions around the systems and the frameworks. And if those things aren't in place, I spend a lot of time building them. Right? So for me, my approach is always strategy and systems, because that's what sustains things. Anytime it's people dependent, particularly when we're looking at one person, it doesn't last. And for me, I don't know, I have this thing about coming back to the same thing. I don't like doing that because if you have to come back to the same thing to continuously fix it, it never leads to an opportunity to grow. Right? And the idea is to grow and to expand. Yeah, we'll have some new challenges, but new challenges are great. It allows for us to build systems and strategy around that, but we just can't keep coming back to the old thing. So I hope I answered your question, but just in terms of like my approach to things, I'm very systems oriented. I probably should have been an engineer because I'm always thinking about systems.
Now that is good to know because it helps to think about systems and strategies, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the strategies that you are able to create that's going to be the thing that you implement, right? So it's not if you have a goal and you cannot implement it, well, it's just a dream. So,
Yeah, and I don't want to be, I call them catchphrase people. Like, you say something that's so profound, but then when you look beyond the words, there's nothing there. I'd rather say simple and basic things, but then you look at the system and it speaks for itself, right? And so in terms of like where I spend a lot of my energy and effort sometimes, and people say, oh, Rachel, you shoot yourself in the foot by doing this. It's oftentimes behind the scenes, because I do understand that behind the scenes is where you move the most dials. I don't need to be the person in the front of it orchestrating it, but I'm behind the scenes because I know it's all moving. I know it's all moving.
love it. Knowing that you have a ton of responsibilities, and many of our students are in the same boat. We have students now who, to be a college student now means that the average college student is working, whether it's part-time or full-time, they are trying to balance academic responsibilities, they're trying to balance social responsibilities, whether they are leaders in their clubs, or they are leaders in their families. They are balancing multiple responsibilities. And as someone who's doing the same as an adult, how do you prioritize effectively and how do you stay focused on your goals?
Yeah, that's a good question. So It's funny, I'm doing it now, but I was also doing it when I was a student. When I was getting my degree from Suffolk, I was working full time at Curry College and I was consulting part time for the YW Boston, right? And so I understand that, right? In terms of how do you manage it all, I think it's really important to have a strategy for what it is. And so for me, I would prioritize based on like what needs my immediate attention versus like time it's going to take to complete things. And I would have like a little matrix for what that looked like so that I was equally spending my time between like long-term projects and things that I had to take care of right away, right? So that I knew that I was checking those boxes and things weren't getting like, mismanaged or falling by the wayside. What's also true is I could only be effective to the degree that I was okay. Right? And so I talk to a lot of people, and it's sad to me that self care is not prioritized, but for me, it is. So I create within my busy schedule pockets of time for me, whether that is to go get my hair done, go get my nails done, a little spa trip, a little massage. Because if I don't look okay, if I don't feel okay, then what I produce is not going to be okay. Right. And so, you know, and then also creating those things gives me something to look forward to as well. Like I think it becomes very monotonous, especially for extremely busy people, if we don't have something that is fun to look forward to, and so balancing it by having like a plan of attack, I think for me has always been helpful, right? Keeping a running list of things like, yes, my calendar is super effective, but I'm a visual person. And so having things that I could like check off, like, okay, I did that. So if you ever walked in my office, you'll see this big whiteboard with all of these boxes of things that I need to do that are either lines drawn through or they're checked off, right? And then creating opportunities to look forward to something where I can completely just disconnect and unplug and have fun and be in that moment because I think it's important to be in the moment.
How do you overcome challenges? Is there any challenge in your career that you felt like you've overcome, and how did you bounce back?
Yeah. I mean, I think at every pivot, there's always been a challenge, right? And, I would love to tell you that there's this great algebraic equation to it, but we know that with challenges, it evokes a different side of us, right? So, like, oftentimes my challenges have been connected to my emotions about the thing, right? Whether, that was going for an opportunity that I didn't get, you know, um, whether that's things that are happening right now coming down from the administration where I feel like my life's work is under attack, right? um I would love to tell you that we take it in stride, but I have real moments where I have to just let it out and cry. To just really let myself feel all the feels about what is happening in all of that, because I don't think that it serves me well to hold on to it and then trying to like move on. I think that's how people get sick. That's my own personal opinion. But after I've cried, but after I cry, I plan and I move on. Whether that's a pivot, whether that's I got to come back to the table, because sometimes you're at a you're in a conversation at a table and the table has become contentious. That might be a challenge, but you don't get the luxury of leaving the table. You might have just lost that round of conversation, but you have to go back. Right. Right.
True.
So I allow myself to feel those feelings, right? And yeah, for me, I cry. Like I gotta let it out, and then I dust myself off. I remind myself of who I am, and I get right back into it. And so that's what I'm doing right now with all this that's happening with the different executive orders that are coming down. Just really thinking about what this means for my work because the work continues. The work continues, right?
Absolutely.
And so, that's what I would tell anyone. You have to allow yourself to feel because we're human, right? We're human beings first. So whatever that challenge is, you got to allow yourself to feel that, right? Because until you feel it, you can't think clearly about it, right? I find that when my emotions and my logic are in conflict, it's impossible to do either one. And so I got to allow myself to feel so that I can think and then move forward.
Well, my last question for you. If you could give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Uh, you know, I think that the younger me was really just trying to figure it out. um, I would tell her to be patient. It's gonna come together. Just keep, don't give up, keep going. Maybe go to class a little bit more. Go to class a little bit more. You know, I be more strategic about the spaces that I was in. So, like, in leveraging them. So, I was in a lot of spaces, but I wasn't leveraging those opportunities. Um, so leverage those opportunities, build those networks, but be patient. Be patient. It comes together. I promise it comes together. Sometimes we can be our worst critic if we look at ourselves and we have this time frame for when things should happen, and who comes up with that? Who comes up with that? We impose it on ourselves, and then we make ourselves feel terrible about it, almost to the point where we paralyze ourselves from our progress. And so I would tell my young self, just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Be patient, be strategic about the networks that you're building and leverage them, but it's going to come together. It just takes time.
Always does.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Deleveaux, and happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month.